The bridge of the Kethvar research vessel Harmonious Discovery was bathed in the sickly red glow of emergency lighting. Captain Zixthara's forearms trembled as she watched the tactical display, 17 hegemony warships closing in on their position, their weapon signatures already charging for the kill. "Engineering, how long until we can jump?" she called out, her voice barely maintaining the calm expected of a ship's commander. "Hyperdrive is still offline, Captain," came the reply from Chief Engineer Vorth. "The attack damaged our primary motivators. We need at least 6 hours." 6 hours? They had maybe 20 minutes before the hegemony fleet would be in firing range. Around her, the research team, xenobiologists, archaeologists, cultural specialists, huddled at their stations. These weren't soldiers. They were scientists who had made the grave mistake of discovering something the hegemony didn't want found. Evidence of systematic genocide. Proof that dozens of species had been erased from galactic history. "Captain," Communications Officer Yella spoke up, her voice tight with fear. "I'm detecting a beacon. It's ancient but still functional. Pre-hegemony era." Zixthara's antennae twitched. "What kind of beacon?" It's a human beacon, Captain." From the quarantine zone around Sol 3, the bridge fell silent. Everyone knew about the quarantine zone. A region of space that had been sealed off for over 2 centuries after first contact with the species designated as humans. The contact had been traumatic. The Galactic Council had unanimously voted to isolate the entire system, forbidding any contact with the aggressive Deathworld species. Stories spoke of being so violent, so unpredictable, that they had to be contained for the safety of the galaxy. "Captain, the hegemony ships are accelerating. 18 minutes to weapons range." Zixthara closed her eyes. Her crew, her people, the invaluable archaeological data they'd discovered about the pre-hegemony civilization, all of it would be lost. The hegemony would execute them all for treason, simply for learning the truth about the galaxy's history. Their bodies would be spaced, their ship destroyed, and their research buried forever. "Yella, can you access the beacon?" I think so, Captain. But the quarantine protocols are suspended under Emergency Authority Alpha 7. Zixthara's voice was steady now. "Send a distress signal. Full disclosure, our position, our situation, and what we've discovered. Captain, with respect, the humans are a quarantined species. They're classified as extremely dangerous. The Council fears them for a reason, Yella. Maybe it's time we found out why." Zixthara moved to the communications station. "If we're going to die anyway, let's at least try to get the truth to someone who might act on it." With trembling hands, Yella activated the ancient beacon. The signal burst out into the void, racing toward the Sol system at faster-than-light speeds. The message was simple but desperate. "To any human forces receiving this transmission, this is Captain Zixthara of the Kethvar scientific vessel Harmonious Discovery. We are under attack by hegemony forces. We have discovered evidence of galactic genocide. We need immediate assistance. Please, you are our only hope." Behind them, the hegemony fleet closed in, their weapons charging. Disruptor beams began to lance through space, and the Harmonious Discovery's shields flared under the assault. As the first enemy boarding pods launched, Zixthara whispered a prayer to the old gods. Not for salvation, she knew they were likely doomed, but for the truth they'd discovered to somehow survive, and for the mysterious Deathworlders to hear their cry. 16 minutes later, the Harmonious Discovery was boarded. The crew was taken prisoner, their research data confiscated, but the transmission had already been sent. Somewhere in the quarantine zone around Sol 3, Earth had heard their cry for help. Admiral Marcus Kane stood in the center of Terra Command's Situation Room, his weathered face carved by decades of military service and the frustration of enforced isolation. The holographic display cast blue light across his features as he studied the Kethvar distress signal for the 5th time. Around the circular obsidian table sat the most powerful figures on Earth, military commanders who had spent 2 centuries preparing for a war they weren't allowed to fight. "Play it again," Kane ordered, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had never lost a battle because he'd never been permitted to fight one. The alien's voice filled the room once more, desperate, frightened, but carrying an undertone of defiant hope. The universal translator, perfected through decades of intercepted galactic communications, converted the clicking, chittering sounds into crystal-clear English. But the raw emotion, the plea of beings facing extinction, needed no translation. To any human forces receiving this transmission, this is Captain Zixthara of the Kethvar scientific vessel Harmonious Discovery. We are under attack by hegemony forces in the Vegu-adjacent sector. We are xenoarchaeologists who have discovered evidence that the hegemony has been systematically destroying records of pre-conquest civilizations. We have proof of genocide on a galactic scale. We need immediate assistance. Please, we know you have been isolated, but you are our only hope. The message ended, leaving the room in heavy silence. Kane could see the same thought reflected in every face around the table. After 200 years of forced isolation, someone was finally asking for their help. Sir, spoke up Colonel Rodriguez, head of Earth's Xenological Intelligence Division, her cybernetic eye glowing softly as she accessed classified files. We confirmed the signal's authenticity through quantum signature analysis. It's definitely from a Kethvar vessel, and our deep space sensor arrays have detected massive energy discharges in that sector consistent with a fleet engagement involving disruptor technology. Kane nodded slowly, his tactical mind already working. What do we know about the Kethvar? They're scientific pacifists, sir. One of only 3 species that actively opposed the quarantine around our system during the original council vote. They argued for diplomatic engagement and cultural exchange rather than isolation. The hegemony and their allies outvoted them 847 to 23. And the hegemony? Kane's voice carried 2 centuries of accumulated resentment. General Harrison, head of Earth's Unified Military Command, leaned forward, his mechanical arm whirring softly as he gestured to the tactical displays. Our intelligence network suggests they control approximately 63% of known galactic territory. They've been systematically conquering or absorbing independent species for the past 5 centuries. More importantly, sir, they're the primary enforcers of our quarantine. Their automated defense stations patrol the boundary of our solar system. Kane's jaw tightened. For 200 years, humanity had been caged like a dangerous animal, branded as a dangerous death world species, and forbidden from joining galactic civilization. Every attempt at peaceful contact had been met with warnings, threats, and eventually orbital weapons platforms that would vaporize any human vessel that crossed the invisible prison walls. Admiral Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, head of the Xenological Research Division, spoke up from her position at the table's far end. The Kethvar's claims about systematic genocide, our xenoarchaeology teams have been analyzing intercepted hegemony data streams for decades. If their evidence confirms our suspicions, we're not just talking about political conquest. We're looking at the deliberate erasure of entire species and their historical records. Cultural extinction on an unprecedented scale. Kane stood and walked to the massive viewing port that dominated the room's eastern wall, looking out at the orbital shipyards where humanity's fleet waited in frustrated readiness. Ships that had never seen combat, crews that had trained for wars they weren't allowed to fight. How long since they sent the signal? 18 hours, sir? If they were under immediate attack when they transmitted. Rodriguez's voice trailed off. They're probably already dead. Kane turned back to face the room, his expression grim. But they chose to reach out to us with their final transmission. They could have sent their distress call to any of the major powers, to the Council itself. Instead, they contacted the quarantined monsters. Sir, General Harrison interjected carefully, the galactic community has made it explicitly clear that any human presence outside the Sol system would be considered an act of war. If we respond to this distress call, then we'll be at war. Kane's voice was ice-cold, carrying the fury of a species that had been caged for 2 centuries. General, what's our current fleet strength? 47 warships of various classes ready for immediate deployment, sir. Plus support vessels and the new Prometheus-class prototypes. But Admiral, we're talking about potentially facing a galactic empire. Intelligence estimates suggest they have access to thousands of ships. Kane's smile was predatory, carrying the confidence of a military that had spent 200 years preparing for exactly this moment. Yes, General, but they've never faced humans in actual combat. They've spent 2 centuries telling themselves we're too dangerous to let out of our cage, building their entire strategic doctrine around keeping us contained. He turned to address the assembled leaders of Earth's military machine. Ladies and gentlemen, we've spent 200 years being told we're too violent, too aggressive, too dangerous for civilized galactic society. Today, we're going to prove them absolutely right. Kane's voice rose, carrying the weight of centuries of accumulated fury. Prep the fleet for immediate deployment. Signal all commands to transition to War Condition 1. We're going to show the galaxy what happens when you ask Deathworlders for help, and what happens when you try to keep us caged. The Retribution dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Vega-adjacent sector like a predator emerging from the shadows, its matte black hull absorbing starlight as it materialized from the quantum foam. Behind it, 17 other human warships followed in perfect formation, vessels that bore no resemblance to the elegant, artistic designs favored by galactic civilization. These were weapons of war, built by a species that understood violence on a fundamental level. Admiral Kane stood on the bridge of the massive dreadnought, his command staff arranged around him with military precision. The tactical display painted a grim picture as sensors swept the local space, cataloging the aftermath of what had clearly been a massacre. "Sir, we're detecting extensive debris fields consistent with a major engagement," reported Lieutenant Commander Ashley Brooks, her voice professionally controlled despite the horror on the screen. "Multiple ship types, but the largest concentration appears to be from a single vessel, sir. Hull composition matches Kethvar specifications." Kane's hands clenched behind his back as he stared at the scattered remains of the harmonious Discovery. Somewhere in that expanding cloud of metal and ceramic had been Captain Zixthera and her crew, scientists who had died for the crime of seeking truth. "What else?" "We're detecting a large fleet approximately 40 million kilometers from our position. Configuration analysis suggests hegemony forces. They appear to be." Brooks paused, checking her readings twice. "They're celebrating, sir." "Celebrating? Victory formations, sir. Parade spacing rather than combat deployments. They're broadcasting on multiple frequencies. It looks like they're transmitting footage of their victory to other systems." Kane's expression darkened. The hegemony wasn't just content with murder. They were making a show of it, using the deaths of peaceful scientists as propaganda. "Captain Torres, take us in." "Silent running until we're within weapons range." The human fleet moved through space like apex predators stalking their prey, their advanced stealth systems perfected through 2 centuries of preparing for this exact scenario, rendering them virtually invisible to hegemony sensors. As they closed the distance, the alien fleet became visible on the main screen. The hegemony ships were magnificent in their own way, massive, elegant vessels that looked more like floating cathedrals than instruments of war. Their hulls gleamed with decorative elements, artistic flourishes that spoke of a civilization grown fat and complacent with its dominance. They moved in perfect formation, a testament to their discipline, but their spacing showed they expected no threat. "Sir, we're intercepting their transmission feeds," Brooks reported, her voice tight with controlled anger. "They're showing the execution of survivors, sir." Kane's jaw tightened. "Show me." The main screen shifted to display the intercepted transmission. The bridge fell silent as they watched hegemony forces systematically destroying escape pods, hunting down survivors who had managed to flee the doomed research vessel. Then the image shifted to show prisoners lined up on the deck of a hegemony ship. There was Captain Zixthera, bloodied but unbowed, her 4 arms bound behind her back. Even through the grainy transmission, Kane could see her defiance as she faced her captors. The universal translator provided her words as a hegemony executioner raised his weapon. "You can kill us, but the truth will survive. Someone will remember what you've done to the galaxy." The hegemony commander, a tall, insectoid creature resplendent in ceremonial armor, laughed with the confidence of absolute power. "No one will remember anything, scientist. Your species will be next to join the disappeared. The galaxy belongs to the hegemony now, and we write its history." Kane watched as Captain Zixthera was forced to her knees, her eyes never showing fear even as death approached. The transmission ended with her execution, broadcast across the galaxy as a warning to anyone who might dare challenge hegemony authority. The bridge of the Retribution was silent for a long moment, the only sound the quiet hum of systems and the breathing of a crew that had just witnessed murder. Then Kane spoke, his voice carrying the cold fury of a species that had spent 2 centuries being told it was too dangerous to exist. "All ships, this is Admiral Kane. You've just witnessed the murder of beings who reached out to us for help. Captain Zixthera died believing that someone would remember, that someone would act. Today we prove her right." He turned to his weapons officer, Lieutenant Torres, whose finger hovered over the firing controls. "The hegemony wants to know why the galaxy fears humans. Today we show them." Kane's next words would echo through galactic history. Target their command ship. Fire. The Retribution's main railgun fired with the fury of 2 centuries of pent-up rage, sending a tungsten slug the size of a small building across space at 20% the speed of light. The Hegemony flagship's shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and conventional projectiles, flared brilliant white for a split second before collapsing under forces they were never designed to handle. The slug punched through the elegant hull like it was tissue paper, and the massive vessel simply ceased to exist in a brief, brilliant explosion that lit up the void. All ships, Kane ordered, his voice carrying across the human fleet, weapons free. No survivors. The battle raged for 3 hours in the cold vacuum of space, turning the void into a graveyard of twisted metal and expanding plasma clouds. The Hegemony fleet, initially numbering 47 ships representing the pride of their local command, had been reduced to 12 battered survivors desperately trying to escape the human onslaught. The human fleet had lost 4 vessels, but those remaining fought with a ferocity that left even veteran Hegemony commanders questioning everything they thought they knew about warfare. Admiral Kane studied the tactical hologram floating before him, watching as red dots representing enemy ships began to pull back from the engagement zone. The surviving Hegemony vessels weren't fleeing in panic. These were professional military officers executing a fighting withdrawal with admirable discipline under impossible circumstances. "Sir, the enemy is attempting to retreat," reported Lieutenant Commander Brooks, her voice hoarse from coordinating 3 hours of continuous combat operations. "They're maintaining formation integrity while moving toward minimum safe distance for hyperspace jump. Estimated time to escape, 14 minutes. Kane nodded slowly, his strategic mind already several moves ahead. The retreating ships represented more than just defeated enemies. They were witnesses to humanity's return to galactic space, carriers of intelligence that would reshape the balance of power across known space. "They're going to report back to their high command," Kane mused, watching the tactical display. "They'll tell them that the quarantine has been breached, that the humans have not only advanced technology but the tactical doctrine to use it effectively. More importantly, they'll report that we show no mercy to those who murder innocents." "Sir, should we pursue?" asked Captain Torres from the weapons station, her fingers still hovering over the firing controls. "We can catch them before they reach jump distance." Kane was quiet for a moment, considering the broader implications of his next decision. Around him, the bridge crew waited with disciplined patience, understanding that their admiral was not just fighting a single battle, but potentially shaping the future of human galactic relations. "All ships, this is Admiral Kane," he announced over the fleet-wide communication system. "Cease fire and assume escort formation around the Retribution. We're going to let them go." The bridge crew exchanged surprised glances, but their professionalism prevented any audible protests. Brooks, however, voiced the question everyone was thinking. "Sir." Kane moved away from the tactical display, walking to the massive viewport that dominated the forward section of the bridge. Beyond the reinforced transparent aluminum, the debris field of the battle stretched for thousands of kilometers, a testament to the price of underestimating humanity. "We're not just fighting a tactical engagement here," Lieutenant Commander Kane explained, his voice carrying the weight of long-term strategic planning. "We're sending a message that will resonate across the galaxy. And sometimes the most effective messages require survivors to carry them." He activated the ship's external communication array, targeting the retreating Hegemony vessels. "Open a channel to the fleeing ships." "Channel open, sir." Kane's voice carried across the void with the authority of a species that had just announced its return to galactic affairs. "Hegemony Fleet, this is Admiral Marcus Kane of the Terran Federation. You have witnessed the consequences of murdering beings under human protection. You will carry this message to your superiors. Earth has heard the call for help from the oppressed species of the galaxy." He paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing with cold precision. "The quarantine you imposed on us 200 years ago is hereby declared null and void. Any further attacks on species seeking our aid will be met with the full force of the Terran military. You have experienced a fraction of our capabilities today. Do not mistake our restraint for weakness." Kane's final words carried the promise of much worse to come. "You have 10 minutes to leave this system. After that, you will be considered hostile forces in violation of interstellar law and treated accordingly." Transmit our message to your command structure. The age of hegemony unopposed dominance is over. The hegemony ships accelerated away, their damaged hulls leaving trails of atmosphere and coolant as they fled toward the hyperspace jump point. Kane watched them go, knowing that each surviving vessel carried more than just defeated personnel. They carried the knowledge that humanity had returned to galactic space, and they were everything the quarantine had been designed to prevent. "Sir, shouldn't we be concerned about retaliation?" Brooks asked. "The hegemony has thousands of ships across their territory." Kane turned back to face his crew, his expression showing the confidence of a commander who had spent decades preparing for exactly this scenario. "They do indeed, Lieutenant Commander. But they've also spent the last 2 centuries telling themselves we're too dangerous to release from quarantine. Now they know why their predecessors made that decision." He gestured toward the tactical display where the retreating red dots were beginning to disappear into hyperspace. "We're not just fighting for the Kethvar anymore. We're fighting for the right to exist as equals in a galaxy that tried to imprison us. And if they want to test whether their fears about us were justified." Kane's smile carried the predatory confidence of a species that had conquered its own planet before reaching for the stars. "They're about to learn what happens when you corner apex predators and then wonder why they evolve claws." The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the neutral space of the Andorian Nexus, a massive space station that had served as the seat of interstellar diplomacy for over 4 centuries. Representatives from 200 species gathered in the great amphitheater, their various forms creating a bizarre tapestry of galactic diversity. The chamber buzzed with tension as crystalline beings, gaseous entities, cybernetic collectives, and organic life forms struggled to process the impossible news that had shattered their carefully ordered universe. The communication systems worked frantically to translate the cacophony of clicks, whistles, harmonic resonances, electromagnetic pulses, and chemical emissions into coherent meaning. Fear permeated every frequency, a primal terror that transcended species barriers and evolutionary differences. Council Prime Vex High, a crystalline being whose species had maintained strict neutrality in galactic conflicts for millennia, pulsed with urgent light patterns as it called for order. The ancient entity's form flickered with stress fractures that spoke of genuine alarm. "We have received multiple confirmed reports from Hegemony Fleet Command. The quarantine around the Sol system has been catastrophically breached. The humans are not only active in galactic space, they have demonstrated military capabilities that exceed our worst projections." A wave of agitation swept through the assembly like a physical force. Several species representatives began vocalizing simultaneously, their terror creating a discordant symphony that the translation systems struggled to process. The Veltar delegation released pheromones of pure panic while the mechanoid Kara's Empire representatives emitted warning signals that set off alert systems throughout the station. "Order! Order!" Vex High's form flared with brilliant light that momentarily blinded several delegations. "We will proceed with systematic analysis. Fleet Commander Zakthal of the Hegemony will present the official after-action report." The insectoid Hegemony commander approached the central podium with visible reluctance, his once pristine ceremonial armor now bearing scorch marks and emergency repair patches from the battle. His mandibles clicked nervously as he faced an audience that had never before seen a Hegemony officer in anything but absolute confidence. "Honored Council," Zakthal began, his voice carrying undertones of barely controlled shock, "the humans have committed an unprovoked act of war against a lawful Hegemony peacekeeping operation. They deployed unknown weapons technology and tactical doctrines that resulted in the destruction of 35 vessels and the deaths of over 40,000 trained personnel. Our preliminary analysis suggests they possess military capabilities that rival or exceed established galactic powers." "What was the specific nature of this peacekeeping operation?" demanded Representative KY Lelera of the Vorthan Commonwealth, her bioluminescent patches flashing with skeptical patterns. Zakthal's hesitation was telling. "The suppression of terrorist activity by Kethvar separatists who were disseminating seditious materials designed to undermine galactic stability. The Kethvar were licensed xenoarchaeologists conducting legitimate scientific research," interjected Council Member Thrixon, his reptilian features twisted in disgust. "Since when does academic inquiry constitute terrorism worthy of fleet-level military response? They were spreading dangerous propaganda about alleged historical. About genocide," interrupted a new voice that cut through the chamber like a blade. Representative Yilseth of the Altarian Federation stood, his tall, ethereal form commanding immediate attention. Let us speak plainly. The Kethvar discovered evidence of the hegemony's systematic erasure of pre-conquest civilizations, and they were murdered for it. The humans responded to their distress call. The chamber erupted in chaos. Accusations flew between delegations as the careful diplomatic veneer began to crack under the weight of revealed truths. Some species called for immediate military mobilization against the human threat, while others demanded investigations into hegemony activities in their own territories. Perhaps, Yilseth continued, once the noise subsided, we should ask ourselves why a dying research team chose to call on the quarantined humans rather than the supposedly protective galactic community. Perhaps we should examine why our peacekeepers were systematically executing prisoners and broadcasting the murders as entertainment. Zachthal's exoskeleton darkened with rage. The humans are a dangerous, aggressive species. We quarantine them for the protection of civilized space. They've now proven that assessment absolutely correct by destroying a military fleet without provocation. Without provocation? Ambassador Kethaner of the surviving Kethvar worlds entered the chamber, his forearms trembling with barely controlled emotion. As the only representative of Captain Zixthara's species present, his words carried special weight. My people sent a distress call to the only species in the galaxy that had shown them kindness during the original quarantine debates. They called on beings who had been caged like animals, and those beings answered. He turned to address the full assembly, his voice rising with passion. The humans kept their word. They came when called. They fought when attacked. They showed mercy to survivors so that the truth could be told. The question is not whether the humans are dangerous, we know they are. The question is whether they are the monsters we pretended they were, or the protectors they proved themselves to be. Vexhi's form pulsed with increasing frequency, showing the strain of processing these revelations. The Council must act swiftly. Intelligence reports indicate that 17 additional species have now transmitted distress signals toward human space. If we cannot contain this situation diplomatically, then we face the consequences of 2 centuries of our own cowardice, Yilseth finished grimly. We created this crisis by choosing fear over engagement, by allowing the hegemony to convince us that imprisonment was safer than communication. Now we must live with what we've unleashed. As the Council descended into heated debate, the truth became clear. The galaxy's carefully maintained order was crumbling, and the species they had feared most was now the one others turned to for salvation. 2 months after the Vega-adjacent incident, the galaxy had been transformed from a relatively stable hierarchy into a chaotic patchwork of rebellion, revolution, and rapid territorial realignment. The carefully maintained order that had persisted for centuries was crumbling as species after species reached out to the newly active human forces. Admiral Kane stood in the command center of Lunar Station Alpha, Earth's primary military coordination facility, watching the tactical display that showed human operations across a staggering 150 light-years of contested space. The holographic projection resembled a 3-dimensional chessboard where humanity was playing against multiple opponents simultaneously. Each blue dot represented a human task force, ranging from single-ship diplomatic missions to full battle groups capable of challenging sector fleets. Each red dot marked a hegemony installation or military force. The pattern was unmistakable. The humans were winning on every front. Sir, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Council, reported Commander Sarah Mitchell, his newly appointed aide-de-camp and a veteran of the Proxima Defense Forces. Her cybernetic implants glowed softly as she processed the incoming data streams. They're requesting immediate diplomatic talks under the auspices of the Neutral Zone Accords. Kane nodded, unsurprised by the development. Intelligence reports had indicated growing fractures within the Council as member species began questioning decades of hegemony-dominated policy decisions. Put it through on the main display. The holographic projector shifted to show Council Prime Vexhi, the ancient crystalline entity now flanked by representatives from several major galactic powers. Notably absent were the usual hegemony advisors, suggesting a significant shift in Council dynamics. Vexhi's form was noticeably dimmer than during their previous communications, indicating either exhaustion or genuine distress. Admiral Kane, Vexhi began, its harmonic voice carrying undertones of urgency. I am Council Prime Vexhi speaking for the emergency session of the Galactic Council. We must speak regarding the deteriorating situation in multiple sectors. The current state of affairs has become unsustainable for all parties involved. Kane's expression remained carefully neutral. I'm listening, Prime. Though I should note that our operations have been strictly defensive in nature, responding to legitimate requests for assistance from sovereign governments and protecting species that have formally requested our aid. The hegemony leadership claims that human forces are engaged in unprovoked attacks on their lawfully controlled territory. Vexhai continued. Meanwhile, our intelligence services confirm that 23 species have now formally requested human military protection, with 7 additional governments in advanced negotiations. The Council requires clarification of your long-term strategic intentions. Before Kane could respond, another figure stepped forward, Fleet Commander Zakthal, looking considerably less composed than during their previous encounters. The insectoid commander's ceremonial armor bore new damage marks, and his movements suggested recent combat stress. The hegemony is prepared to engage in ceasefire negotiations, Zakthal announced, his mandibles clicking with barely controlled frustration. We are willing to discuss territorial adjustments and recognize human sovereignty over the Sol system and immediate neighboring star clusters. In exchange, your forces will return to pre-breach quarantine boundaries and cease all interference in established galactic governmental structures. Kane's laugh was harsh and without humor. You're offering us territories we already control, in exchange for abandoning allies who specifically requested our protection. That's not negotiation, Commander. That's a demand for surrender with face-saving terminology. You cannot sustain operations against the combined resources of the galactic community, Zakthal protested, though his voice lacked its previous confidence. The hegemony maintains defensive pacts with over 40 species. We possess industrial capabilities and military reserves that dwarf anything a single system power could possibly maintain. Kane brought up the current tactical situation on his personal display, then transmitted it to the Council representatives. And yet, Commander, in 2 months of continuous operations, you've lost over 400 ships across 17 different theaters. Your casualty rates are climbing exponentially. Your own client species are beginning to question the invincibility you've spent centuries cultivating. How many more defeats before they start sending their own distress signals to us? The statistics were devastating. Human task forces had achieved victory-to-loss ratios that defied conventional military analysis. More importantly, they had demonstrated an ability to appear anywhere in the galaxy with minimal warning, strike with overwhelming force, and disappear before enemy reinforcements could respond. Vexhai's form flickered with increased frequency, a sign of processing strain in crystalline species. Admiral, surely we can identify a diplomatic solution that avoids continued military escalation. The Council represents the collective wisdom of 200 species. There must be common ground for peaceful resolution. Kane leaned forward, his voice taking on the cold precision that had become his trademark in diplomatic communications. There is indeed a solution, Prime, and it's quite simple. The hegemony ceases all aggressive expansion operations. It allows the species it has conquered to choose their own governmental systems through supervised elections. It stops executing scientists, journalists, and political dissidents who discover or report inconvenient truths. It begins behaving like a legitimate government rather than a galactic protection racket. He paused, allowing his words to sink in before delivering his ultimatum. Here are humanity's formal terms. The hegemony will immediately cease all offensive military operations against independent species. They will allow unrestricted passage for human vessels responding to distress calls from any source. They will release all political prisoners currently held in their detention facilities and submit to independent oversight of their administrative policies in client territories. In exchange, we will limit our operations to defensive actions and humanitarian assistance missions. Zakthal's exoskeleton darkened to near black, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. You're demanding the complete dissolution of legitimate governmental authority. The hegemony has brought order and stability to a chaotic galaxy for over 5 centuries. Kane's smile was predatory, carrying the confidence of a species that had just proven its military superiority across multiple star systems. I'm demanding accountability, Commander. If the hegemony truly serves the interests of the galactic community as you claim, it should have no difficulty proving that assertion to independent observers. The transmission flickered as the Council representatives engaged in rapid private consultation. Finally, Vexhai spoke again, its voice carrying new undertones of resignation. The Council will deliberate on your proposals, Admiral. However, you must understand, if these negotiations fail to produce acceptable terms, you will face a coordinated response from multiple galactic powers. The hegemony maintains significant alliance structures that could mobilize against human interests. Kane's response carried the quiet confidence of a species that had spent 2 centuries preparing for exactly this scenario. Prime, we appreciate the Council's diplomatic efforts. But you should understand something fundamental about human nature. We have absolutely nothing left to lose. We've been quarantined, isolated, and demonized for 2 centuries. If the galaxy decides to validate those fears by attempting to destroy us, his smile carried the promise of violence that had terrified galactic civilization into quarantining humanity in the first place. We'll be happy to show you exactly why Earth is classified as a death world. The Battle of Kepler 442 would be remembered as the moment the galaxy learned what humans meant by no mercy. The hegemony had assembled a fleet of over 800 ships, the largest military force in recorded galactic history. They had come to the Kepler system to make an example of the humans, to show the galaxy that the quarantine species could be defeated. They had miscalculated. Admiral Kane stood on the bridge of the Retribution, now flagship of a fleet that bore no resemblance to the forces that had answered the Kethvar distress call. The Prometheus project had yielded fruits beyond imagination. Ships that could phase in and out of normal space, weapons that could tear holes in reality itself, and most importantly, a tactical doctrine that treated space warfare as a 3-dimensional chess game where the rules could be rewritten at will. Sir, the hegemony fleet is taking formation, reported Commander Mitchell. They're arranging themselves in a traditional wall of battle. 800 ships in a layered defensive formation. Kane nodded, studying the tactical display. The hegemony was fighting the last war, using tactics that had served them well for centuries. But they had never faced humans in a pitched battle. Signal the fleet. Execute Pandora Protocol. Around the Retribution, space itself began to ripple. The human fleet, only 60 ships compared to the hegemony's 800, began to phase in and out of normal space, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. The hegemony sensors couldn't track them, couldn't predict their movements. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the hegemony flagship, Mitchell reported. Put it through. The holographic display showed Fleet Commander Zakthal, his insectoid features twisted with rage. Human Admiral, you will surrender immediately or face the consequences of your defiance. Kane's response was calm. Commander, you have 30 seconds to order your fleet to withdraw. After that, you will be considered hostile forces in violation of the Kepler Accords. The Kepler Accords? This is the Kepler system. You have no authority here. We have the authority granted to us by the 17 species that have requested our protection, Kane replied, including the Kepler colonists, who sent us a distress call about hegemony forces massing in their system. Zakthal's mandibles clicked in fury. You will not dictate terms to the hegemony. All ships, open fire. The hegemony fleet opened fire with everything they had. Energy beams, plasma torpedoes, kinetic projectiles, all of it reached out across space toward the human fleet. But the humans weren't there anymore. They had phased out of normal space, existing in a dimension where the hegemony weapons couldn't touch them. Execute Damocles' strike, Kane ordered. The human fleet rematerialized, not in their original positions but scattered throughout the hegemony formation. They had appeared inside the enemy formation where their overlapping fields of fire meant nothing. The slaughter began. Human ships fired point-blank into hegemony vessels that had never been designed to face enemy fire from within their own formation. The elegant, artistic designs that had dominated the galaxy for centuries proved fragile when subjected to human weapons designed for maximum destructive efficiency. But the humans didn't stop there. As hegemony ships began to die, the human vessels began to phase again, appearing and disappearing throughout the formation. They were impossible to track, impossible to target, impossible to predict. Sir, the hegemony fleet is breaking formation, Mitchell reported. They're trying to scatter. Negative. Execute Cerberus Protocol. The human fleet spread out, their phase drives allowing them to cover distances that should have been impossible. Every time a hegemony ship tried to escape, human vessels appeared to block their path. The trap was complete. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the hegemony fleet was gone, not scattered, not retreating, but obliterated. 800 ships reduced to debris and atomic particles. The humans had suffered no casualties. As the last hegemony ship died, Kane opened a channel to the galaxy. This is Admiral Marcus Kane of the Terran Federation, broadcasting on all frequencies. Today, the hegemony sent 800 ships to destroy the human fleet. They believed their numbers would be sufficient to crush us. They were wrong. The channel switched to tactical displays showing the battle's progress, the phase attacks, the impossible maneuvers, the systematic destruction of the hegemony fleet. The galaxy isolated humanity for 2 centuries, believing we were too dangerous to exist among civilized species. Today, we proved that assessment correct. We are dangerous. We are violent. We are everything you feared we might be. Kane's voice grew harder. But we are also just. We fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. We protect those who ask for our protection. And we show no mercy to those who would oppress the innocent. The transmission shifted to show the refugee ships that had been fleeing hegemony territory, millions of beings from dozens of species, all seeking protection under human authority. The age of hegemony dominance is over. The age of human protection has begun. Any species that seeks our aid will receive it. Any government that oppresses its people will answer to us. Any force that threatens the innocent will face the full fury of the Terran Federation. Kane's final words echoed across the galaxy. You called us Deathworlders. You were right. We are death to tyrants, death to oppressors, death to those who would rule through fear. The galaxy wanted to know what happens when you cage a dangerous species for 2 centuries. The transmission ended with images of human ships moving through space, no longer hiding, no longer constrained. They were everywhere, protecting the weak, defending the innocent, and showing no mercy to those who would harm them. The cage was not just open, it was destroyed. And the galaxy would never be the same. In the end, the galaxy got exactly what it asked for. They wanted to know what would happen if they cornered a species evolved on a death world. They found out. Final entry, Galactic Historical Archive. Post-Liberation Era, Year 1.